Imagine for a moment, you wake up tomorrow morning with the realization that you will never die. Never. Neither illness, nor old age, nor death. Sounds fantastic? But what if I tell you that 3 men in the history of mankind have already experienced exactly this? Death is the only guarantee that everyone receives at birth. She does not ask for permission, does not exclude, does not bargain. Rich and poor, strong and weak, righteous and sinful, all pass through these gates. It was always like that. So it is now. But history knows 3 excluded, 3 names that violated the most immutable law of nature. Who are these people? What made them so special that death itself gave way to them? What secret did they know? What power did they have that allowed them to avoid the fate of all mankind? Their stories are not just amazing. They are able to change your perception of the possibilities of the human soul. Purvi lived at a time when the world was just beginning to sink into darkness. The second burned with a sacred fire in the era of spiritual decline. We will talk about the third at the end, but his story will amaze you the most. What unites them? Why exactly were they chosen for this greatest privilege? And most importantly, what can their experience give us today in the 21st century, when death seems as inevitable as the sunrise? Get ready for a journey through the millennia to meet people who peered behind the veil of eternity and were taken alive to the place where others end up only after death. Their stories will change your perspective on life, death, and what lies beyond them. If you are ready to learn the truth that can shake the foundations of your worldview, stay with us. The secret of the 3 immortals begins right now, long before the waters of the Great Flood engulfed the earth, long before Noah began building the ark. There walked the earth a man whose destiny defied the very nature of mortality. His name is Enoch. He was not the son of the accursed Cain, nor did he descend from the innocent Abel. Enoch led his lineage from the 3rd son of Adam and Eve, Seth. Imagine a world in which every human thought was poisoned by evil, a world where violence has become the norm and righteousness is a rarity. It was in such a reality that Enoch lived. Passions boiled around him, vices flourished, people forgot their creator. But Enoch chose a different path. The Bible describes his life surprisingly simply. Enoch walked before God and he did not die because God took him. Behind these stingy words hides a secret that has troubled minds for centuries. What does it mean to walk before God in a world where everyone has turned away from the Creator? Enoch was the 7th from Adam, a number symbolizing divine perfection. Through the line of Sif, he carried a legacy of spiritual steadfastness in a world that had forgotten its Creator. He became the father of Methuselah, the longest-lived man in human history, who lived 969 years. But even Methuselah, with his incredible longevity, tasted death. Only Enoch escaped this fate. See the paradox? In a generation where people lived for centuries but still died, Enoch lived less but did not die at all. Does the length of days matter less than the depth of your relationship with God? Enoch's world plunged into chaos. Sin multiplied, violence increased. People created idols of their own making. But Enoch did not drift with the current. He chose intimacy with God instead of popularity among people, obedience instead of adaptation. Enoch differed from the people of his generation, while others surrendered to the attraction of evil, exchanging purity for pleasure and holiness for rebellion. Enoch quietly set foot on a path that almost no one dared to follow. In an era when sin was glorified and righteousness was ridiculed, Enoch made a radical choice. He began to walk with God. But this was not a random walk. It was a vital journey that required dedication, perseverance, and a spiritual hunger that few possess. Have you ever wondered what it is like to be the only one in a whole generation who seeks the face of God? Do you hear his voice clearly while others completely ignore him? The peace surrounding Enoch was decaying from within. The corruption was not only external, It lived in people's hearts. Violence, idolatry, greed. These were not accidental sins. It was culture. And yet Enoch's soul longed for something more. Instead of swimming in the current of debauchery, he turned to heaven. He dared to live in harmony with the Creator, choosing the sacred instead of survival. His life became a living protest against everything that peace has become. Genesis records something extremely rare. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, because God took him. These few words hide the depth of mystery and intimacy that challenges the modern soul. Enoch's walk was not just outward obedience, it was closeness. He didn't just believe in God, he lived in constant communion with Him. Every day, Enoch invited God into his decisions, thoughts, and emotions. Can you imagine daily conversations with the Almighty, where His voice becomes as familiar as your own? What if your relationship with God was so deep, so inextricably personal, that heaven could no longer wait for your death to take you home? Enoch's life was not built on public service or dramatic miracles. She was noted for quiet faithfulness, steadfast devotion, and thirst to please God. In the mysterious dawn of humanity, long before kings ruled the nations or prophets roamed the earth, the length of life stretched beyond what we can understand today. People did not live for decades, but for centuries. It was a time when the pulse of creation still echoed fresh from Eden, and the boundaries between heaven and earth seemed thinner. Then, before God announced in Genesis that the days of a person would be limited to 120 years, people often exceeded 800 or even 900 years of life. And yet, among all these ancient lives, one stood out not because of how long he lived, but because of how he walked. The story of Enoch did not begin with glory or miracles. At the age of 65, like many others of his time, he became the father of Methuselah, who later became the longest-lived man in all of Scripture. But something changed in Enoch after that moment, as if fatherhood awakened something deeper in his spirit. From that moment on, his journey with God became intimate, intense, and transformative. Over the next 300 years, he built a relationship with the divine that transcended ordinary faith. In total, Enoch lived 365 years, 1 year for each day of our calendar, as if symbolizing a full life, completely aligned with the heavenly rhythm. But what does it mean to live in such harmony with God that even death cannot touch you? Can you imagine yourself so close to the Creator that your very presence on earth becomes too sacred to remain? Enoch's walk was not defined by ritual or religion. It was marked by relations. His faith was not distant or ceremonial. She breathed, moved, was alive. The book of Hebrews later confirms this. By faith, Enoch was transferred so that he did not see death, and he did not die because God transferred him. For before his transfer, he received the testimony that he pleased God. This pleasing to God was not earned by perfection, but by trust, obedience, and constant self-giving. In the era when darkness enveloped the land of Israel like a shroud, and the hearts of the people grew cold and moved away from their Creator, one man dared to stand against the tide. His name was Elijah, a prophet set apart for a personal mission, burning with holy conviction during a spiritual collapse. Israel was not simply distracted, he was tempted. Under the rule of King Ahab, one of the most wicked rulers in the history of Israel, and under the influence of his wife Jezebel, the people left the God of their fathers. Jezebel, an ardent worshiper of the pagan god Baal, did not simply tolerate idolatry. She actively planted the ego. The altars of Baal rose high throughout the land, and the voices of the true prophets were silenced, persecuted, and killed. Can you imagine life in a time when truth was outlawed and righteousness was mocked? Would you have the courage to speak for God when your life was at stake? But Ilya did not flinch. He did not bow to the pressure of a corrupt crown or the roaring voices of a deceived people. Instead, he faced evil on his highest throne. Boldly standing before King Ahab, Ilya announced a divine judgment that shook the very ground under their feet. There will be neither dew nor rain until I speak the word. This single statement sealed the heavens, For 3.5 long years, the sky refused to open. The harvest has withered, the rivers have run dry, and the once fertile soil of Israel turned to dust under the weight of drought. But even when famine swept the land, God's hand remained on his prophet. While the people were starving, Ilya was hidden by the Horaf stream, where he drank from the stream and asked about the crows. Yes, crows, scavengers by nature, have become a divine delivery service. They brought him bread and meat every day, proving that when God commands creation, even the birds obey. While the heavens remained closed at the word of Elijah, the prophet himself became a witness of the amazing care of the Most High. Life at the Horaf stream was not just survival. It was a lesson in trust in its purest form. Imagine yourself sitting alone by a babbling brook, hearing only the rustle of wings and the whisper of God's presence in the silence. Every morning and every evening, black wings descended from the sky. Crows, these birds, which the law called unclean, became sacred messengers. They brought fresh bread and meat to the man of God. Isn't it amazing how the Creator uses what the world considers despicable to fulfill his plans? But even this stream eventually dried up under the merciless sun of drought. It would seem that the end of divine provision has come, but God never leaves his own. Elijah received a new instruction. Get up, go to Sarepta of Sidon. Sarepta is a pagan city outside of Israel. There he was waiting for a meeting that would shake his understanding of faith. At the city gate, he saw a widow collecting her sick. In her eyes, one could read desperation. In her voice, submission to the inevitable. She was preparing the last meal for herself and her son before death overtook their home. Supplies of flour came to an end. Butter was running out. This was the finale of their story. And then Ilya utters words that sound almost cruel. Give me water to drink and bring me a piece of bread. But then he adds, don't be afraid, go, do as she said. Only first, make a small cake for me and bring it to me, and you will make it for yourself and your son afterwards. A shocking request for people dying of hunger. Give the last to someone who came as a stranger? But there was something more in these words, the promise of a miracle. The widow obeyed, and the impossible happened. Her vat of flour did not run out. The jar of butter did not dwindle. Day after day, throughout the drought, God honored her faith and Elijah's word. During times of hunger and hopelessness, they lived under supernatural cover. 3 lives, the prophet, the widow, and her son, became a living testimony that God is able to provide even when all natural sources have dried up. Elijah's path was marked not only by droughts and hidden provisions, he reached his most violent spiritual peak on the windswept heights of Mount Carmel. It was here, standing alone against the people mired in idolatry, that Ilya dared to draw a devil in the sand. The prophet challenged a divine confrontation between truth and deception. If the Lord is God, then follow him. And if Baal, then follow him. With the entire court of Israel gathered on the mountain, and 450 prophets of Baal watching what was happening, Elijah set the scene for the moment that would either proclaim him a prophet or cost him his life. What would you do at that moment? Would you be able to stand alone in front of an angry crowd, defying kings and false gods, trusting only that heaven will answer your cry? The prophets of Baal began the ritual, invoking their god from morning to evening. They danced, shouted, even cut themselves in despair, hoping that fire would fall from the sky. But they were answered only by silence. There was no voice, no flame, no God. Then Ilya spoke, not in fury, but with faith. He calmly rebuilt the Lord's altar, using 12 stones to represent the tribes of Israel. Then, in an act of astonishing confidence, he doused the victim and the firewood with water. 3 times. The altar got wet. The ditch around him was filled with water. And then he prayed. No shouting, no theatricality, just a sincere, heartfelt prayer to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. And in that silence, the heavens moved. The fire fell like lightning, burning from the sky, consuming the offering. Stones, earth, even water, everything disappeared in a holy flame. Can you imagine yourself standing there, eyes wide open, as the impossible unfolds before you? The people fell on their faces exclaiming, "The Lord is God." The power of that moment broke the spell of idolatry. Elijah not only survived, he returned the spiritual heart of the nation. But God is not done yet. After 3.5 years, the rain has finally arrived. Despite these miraculous victories, Elijah's battle was far from over. Jezebel's fury flared up. When she learned about what happened to her prophets, she vowed to kill Elijah. And here is the man who called fire from the sky, ran into the desert, alone, exhausted, and depressed. Under the shade of a juniper bush, Elijah collapsed and exclaimed, "Enough already, Lord, take my soul." Can a fire-calling prophet also fight despair? Can great faith and deep exhaustion live in one soul? Surprisingly, God did not rebuke the ego. Instead, God sent an angel, not once, but twice, to feed the ego. With heavenly bread and water, Elijah's strength was restored. Then, guided by the Spirit, he made a 40-day journey to Mount Horeb, the same mountain where Moses once met God. There, in the cave, Elijah met not a fire or an earthquake, but a whisper, a quiet, holy whisper that cut deeper than thunder. And in that quiet voice, God restored the ego. He renewed Elijah's purpose and gave him new instructions, because the mission was not yet complete. Even after the fire from heaven and the rain upon prayer, Elijah's greatest moment was still ahead. Elijah's life was an interweaving of confrontation and compassion, miracles and being sent. He called a drought and raised the dead. But what awaited him ahead would challenge nature itself. What kind of fate should a person have, so that heaven itself reaches out and takes him? Elijah's story is far from over. And soon, we will witness a moment so powerful, so unforgettable that even his enemies could not deny his divine origin. Are you ready to see what happens when the heavens open not to send rain, but to receive a person? Hold tight, because soon Elijah's last earthly moment will break all the laws of nature. Elijah's earthly journey was coming to an end, and unlike most, he knew about it. This was no ordinary death. Not illness, not war, not old age signaled his departure. This was a direct revelation from God himself. The prophet who once heard the heavens in whispers was now called by the heavens in glory. But before he could leave, there was one last act of obedience, the passing of the prophetic torch. Next to Elijah was Elisha, a young man chosen by God, called not just to follow in the footsteps of Elijah, but to carry his anointing even further. Elisha burned his plows and left everything behind to follow Elijah, and now the time has come for him to accept the mantle. Together they walked step by sacred step, knowing that this journey would end in divine separation. They traveled from Gilgal to Bethel to Jericho, 3 places with deep spiritual symbolism, and finally came to the banks of the Jordan River. There, Elijah took off his mantle, the very symbol of his prophetic vocation, and hit the water. The river split in two, just as it did with Joshua generations ago, and the 2 prophets crossed over on dry land. What should have moved in Elisha's heart at that moment? Was it reverence? Was it sadness? Was he ready to go alone? As they walked on, suddenly the sky opened, but not with thunder or storm. A chariot of fire, drawn by horses of flame, descended from heaven. This was not a vision. It wasn't a dream. Before Elisha's eyes, the chariot separated the 2 men, and Elijah was raised to heaven not in death, but in a whirlwind. The wind howled, the fire danced, and Elijah was gone. Can you imagine this? The roar of the whirlwind, the blinding brilliance of the flame? Elisha shouted, my father, the chariot of Israel and his horse." And he never saw him again. But Elijah's mantle fell to the ground. Elisha picked it up, went to the Jordan, and struck the waters, exclaiming, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" And the waters parted, The spirit of Elijah rested on Elisha. The fiery prophet left, but his power remained. Thus ended the earthly history of the second man who never knew death. Elijah did not go down to the grave, did not see decay. He was taken alive into the presence of God, a reward for a life lived in unconditional trust and obedience. We have already mentioned two names, Enoch and Elijah. But who is the third? Who else has been awarded this greatest of all privileges, to escape the gates of death and enter eternity alive? The third was Jesus Christ himself. Yes, he died on the cross, but death could not hold him. On the third day he was resurrected, and then before the eyes of the disciples, he ascended to heaven alive. He not only defeated death, he destroyed its power forever. What do these three men have in common? What made them worthy of such an incredible fate? First of all, their faith. Not just faith in the existence of God, but a living, working faith that changed every aspect of their lives. Enoch walked with God in peace, having fallen into evil. Elijah stood for the truth when lies ruled the earth. Jesus came as light in darkness and defeated death itself. Each of them lived, not for himself, but for the will of God. Their stories are not just ancient legends. This is an invitation for each of us. They show that intimacy with God is not just possible, it can change the very nature of our existence. They prove that even in the darkest times, one person living in complete obedience to God can shine so brightly that it attracts the attention of heaven. Death is still real to us today, but thanks to their example, we know she does not have the last word. Their lives whisper to us through the ages. Walk with God, stand for the truth, live in faith. And who knows, perhaps your life will also become so precious to heaven that death will lose its power over you. The secret of the three immortals is revealed, but the greatest secret is just beginning. The secret of how your own life can reflect their faith and become a bridge between earth and heaven.